He rose to prominence in the late 1990s to the early 2000s as a man who could predict the future. I speak of Safa Asuntuwa, most popularly known as Safa the Reader Man. In this video, I look back on his career as a psychic and spiritual reader. I look at few of his psychic predictions and look at his untimely and tragic death. Plus, I look at the arrest and court cases that followed. I am Nigel D. Salmon. Hit that subscription button. You are watching Jamaican Chapter. Safa first came to prominence in 1998 doing a radio program on Class FM in which he offered advice to listeners about their personal relationships and future. Soon after, he did a weekly column in the Gleaner's Flair magazine called Talk to Safa. Many persons wrote letters to him for advice about their future on a variety of things. For example, in this day's publication, one person asked, "Dear Safa, I was born on the 30th of the 9th, My life is really rough and sad. I have no work, no money, no loved ones, no health, and no children. No one cares about me, but God and myself. I am tired of people using me. Please help me. Tell me what to do and what you see. Please pray for me. Thank you." This letter was from J.S. in Vineyard Town. Safa replied by saying, "Dear J.S., sometimes it's best when you don't have any money. But if you look within yourself, you can find the key to you and what you are really to do with your life. I know the road ahead seems long, but remember that you are not walking alone." In another letter, this person wrote, "Dear Safa, I will be a grown woman in 3 months' time and my performance in school is very poor. I try to the best of my ability, but it seems no good because instead of improving, I fail. Safa, please tell me what will happen in my life. I would like to know if I will perform well in my CXC examinations the coming year. May God be with you always and continue to do the good work. Thank you." This letter was from MP in St. Thomas. Safa responded by saying, "Dear MP, each time you fail, just keep trying. MP, you can read Psalms 67 for sleep, and so what you learn the day before, you can dream it until it's part of you." In another day's publication of his column, this person wrote, "Dear Safa, I am 21 years old and would like to know the answer to these questions if it's possible. I have been offered a job in Philadelphia as a live-in babysitter in September, but there is just one problem. I have not yet received my US visa. Will I be able to receive my visa before September to do this job? I am presently talking to a young man who is a policeman, and I would love to know if there is a future for us. My goal is to become a psychologist. I would like to know, will I be successful in achieving my goals in life soon? Please, Safa, if you can tell me anything at all, please do so. This letter was from RB in St. Catherine. Safa replied by saying, "Dear RB, I wish you were all right, but I can see that you need some personal attention." Safa became more visual when he did a stint with Television Jamaica TVJ, hosting a program on Wednesday nights called Quest with Safa, telling callers about their future. It was a very popular program, and many persons stayed up late until 11 p.m. to watch it. On Monday, June 24, 2002, Safa Asuntuwa was at his home in Mount Joy in the hills of St. Andrew with visitors Christopher Dixon and another man called Juvenile. Another male was at the location that day. His name, Michael Thompson. What Michael Thompson saw and experienced that day was to prove crucial in police investigation and prosecution. According to Michael Thompson, who is a cousin of Safa, Christopher Dixon and Juvenile, both in their 20s, were with Safa at the house. Nothing looked out of the ordinary. Michael Thompson said he left the location at around 5:15 p.m. on that Monday, June 24, 2002. Few hours later, Safa got into his black Honda Civic motor car, accompanied by Christopher Dixon and Juvenile. With Safa at the steering wheel, the black Honda Civic drove from the residence. Safa at that point had no idea how that late evening was going to turn out. After Safa drove out with those two men from his house, the men at some point in the journey launched a physical attack on the self-proclaimed psychic, beating him about the upper body, breaking his ribs and damaging internal organs. That's how vicious the beating was. The two men, Christopher and Juvenile, tried to tie Safa up with the electric cord, but Safa was still fighting back and could not be successfully bound. While beating up Safa, one of the men used a knife and stabbed him in the forehead. Safa received several defensive cuts on his hands while trying to save his own life before he received the fatal wounds. Safa succumbed to the vicious attack. His lifeless body was then dumped in a gully along the Cavaliers Main Road in rural St. Andrew. About 11:30 p.m. on that same Monday night, Michael Thompson, the cousin of Safa, was coming back to the house. He at this time had no knowledge of what had happened to Safa. Michael Thompson said he saw Safa's black Honda Civic motor car drove into Safa's driveway in a haste, but Safa was not in the car. The car then spun around and sped towards Michael. Michael said he had to jump on the bonnet on the front of the car to avoid being hit. As he jumped on the front of the car, he glanced into the car and saw Juvenile at the steering and Christopher Dixon in the front passenger seat. Were they trying to kill him with the car? Michael was not going to wait to find out. He jumped off the front of the car, ran down a cliff, and went to a neighbor's house. He desperately asked the neighbor to call the police. When police officers arrived, he told them about the two men. In addition, Safa was nowhere to be found. In the morning of the next day, that's Tuesday, June 25, 2002, police officers found Safa's Honda Civic on Stony Hill Road. The men had abandoned it there. The car was taken to the Constant Spring police station. At about 10:30 a.m., the tragic news began to spread. Safa's lifeless body was found in the gully, clad only in a tracksuit pants. His naked upper body bore signs of torture. It was then confirmed Safa, the Reader man, is dead. Acting on reliable information, police officers found Christopher Dixon in Seaview Gardens and arrested him on that same day Safa's body was discovered, Tuesday, June 25, 2002. Christopher Dixon was interrogated and faced an identification parade. He was later charged with the murder. His accomplice, Juvenile, was never fully identified and caught. The court trial for the murder of 28-year-old Safa Asuntuwa began on Monday, June 16, 2003 in the Home Circuit Court in Kingston. 25-year-old Christopher Dixon, an upholsterer by profession, was the only accused on trial. Leading the prosecution were the then Assistant Director of Public Prosecution, Lorraine Smith, and Crown Counsel, Diane Gordon. Presiding judge was Justice Donald McIntosh. The jury consisted of 12 jurors. It was a 3-day trial before the jury decided the verdict. The first day of the trial was Monday, June 16, 2003. The second day was Wednesday, June 18, 2003. And the third day was Wednesday, June 25, 2003. At the trial, Michael Thompson, cousin of Safa and prosecution main witness, testified about who he saw and what he experienced on the evening and late night of June 24, 2002. It was his testimony which revealed that Christopher Dixon and Juvenile were at Safa's house on Monday, June 24, 2002. Testimony also came from Detective Inspector Altimorth Campbell, who said he and other police officers responded to the report on June 25, 2002, found Safa's stolen Honda Civic motor car, and later found Christopher Dixon in Seaview Gardens, from where they took him into custody. The detective inspector further said that Christopher Dixon admitted that he and his friend had beaten and stabbed Safa. Christopher Dixon's defense in court was rather weak. He claimed he never knew Safa and had never been to Safa's house. The verdict. On Wednesday, June 25, 2003, the case went to the 12-member jury for deliberation. The jury had to return a unanimous verdict of guilty or innocent of murder. 1 hour passed and the jury was still deliberating. After 3.5 hours, Justice Donald McIntosh got curious and somewhat impatient as to why the jury was taking so long to reach a verdict. He summoned the jury and asked them if they had arrived at a unanimous verdict. The foreman of the jury told him no. Justice Donald McIntosh then uttered some words which would later work in favor of the defendant, Christopher Dixon. In frustration over the length of time the jury was taking to reach a verdict, Justice Donald McIntosh told the jurors the following. He said, "If we can't get you 12 people who listen to the same evidence, which in my opinion does not need a rocket scientist to understand, then we are really wasting time with a jury system, because clearly it must mean that you don't understand yourself or the evidence." Among other utterances, he further said, "I am paid to be here, but certainly we can't have a jury system where we have a simple issue and you can't make up your minds." He ended by telling the jurors that it was their time and they could take all day if they wanted. Maybe the jurors felt rushed by the impatience or frustration shown by the judge, because after resuming deliberation, they came to a unanimous verdict within just 25 minutes. The jury found 26-year-old Christopher Dixon guilty of non-capital murder. Date for the sentence was set for Friday, June 27, 2003, just 2 days later. On the day of the sentence, Christopher Dixon sat in front Justice Donald McIntosh to hear the amount of years he will have to spend in prison. Since he was taken into custody on June 25, 2002, he was never granted bail. Now that he was found guilty, it clearly meant more time behind bars. Mr. Justice Donald McIntosh sentenced Christopher Dixon to life in prison for the murder of Safa Asuntuwa. He recommended that Dixon served 20 years before he was eligible for parole. So what about the motive for the murder of Safa the Reader Man? The motive is not clear because Christopher Dixon maintained his claim to innocence during the trial. But let's look at two possible motives. First, scamming went wrong. Safa professed himself to be a reader man, a man who could tell others their future. Could it have been that Safa took money from the two men and gave them a prediction which turned out to be false? One can clearly understand the anger those two men would have felt after paying their money and realized they were lied to. There is the other possible motive: a sexual affair or homophobia. You see, Safa was part of the LGBT community. Nothing is wrong with that. Could it have been that Safa was sexually involved with Christopher and Juvenile before something went wrong? This is not all impossible. Those two men were seen in Safa's company before. On the other hand, could it have been that Christopher and Juvenile were homophobic and after finding out Safa's sexual orientation attacked him? Since the motive was never publicly revealed by Safa's killers, the public can only speculate. Attorneys for Christopher Dixon filed an application to the Court of Appeal against his conviction and sentence on the grounds that the judge made prejudicial comments to the jury at his trial. The Court of Appeal upheld the submissions, overturned Christopher's conviction, set aside his sentence, and ordered a new trial. The Court of Appeal found that those comments made by Justice Donald McIntosh to the jury were prejudicial and could have the effect of forcing the jury to arrive at a verdict. The retrial of Christopher Dixon for the murder of Safa Asuntuwa was to begin in 2004. But the retrial was faced with delays mainly because Michael Thompson, the prosecution's main witness, could not be found. Michael Thompson had lost interest, and not wanting to be involved in the retrial, he went into hiding. This caused the prosecution to not be ready at every court appearance from 2004 until the year 2013. The retrial eventually started in January of 2013. Without the main witness, Michael Thompson, the prosecution took a different approach. The prosecution applied for the transcript of the evidence which Michael Thompson had given at the previous trial to be tendered in evidence under the Evidence Amendment Act. There was a new judge for the retrial, Mr. Justice Lloyd Hibbert. Justice Hibbert allowed the prosecution to use Michael Thompson's recorded testimony from the first trial. So, Michael Thompson's testimony was read out to the jury in the retrial. This approach by the prosecution did not work. On Wednesday, January 23, 2013, the jury went into deliberation for 2 hours and returned with a verdict: not guilty. So after being in prison from the year 2002, Christopher Dixon was then free to go home. The death of Safa the Reader Man was a tragic loss both to those who personally knew and loved him and the fans of his column and television show. Safa was talented, creative, and was the first Jamaican radio, newspaper column, and television psychic, or as he preferred to call himself, Reader Man. Safa had made his mark, a unique one, in the history of radio, newspaper, and television in Jamaica. Because since his death, no other Jamaican had broken his record as a reader man through the media. Thousands followed his column in the Gleaner, and thousands stayed up late on Wednesday nights to watch his live program to get his advice and predictions. But speaking about predictions, one big question still lingers after Safa's death. How could a man who claimed he could look into the future and tell people what they want to know was not able to predict his own tragic demise? Why couldn't he predict that those 2 men were planning to kill him and then avoid them? The question still lingers. After Safa's death on June 25, 2002, his body was collected by Madden's Funeral Home in Kingston. On Saturday, July 6, 2002, his memorial service was held at Dovecot Memorial Park in St. Catherine. His body was later cremated there. Sadly, after the cremation, no one turned up for his ash. So, after 3 years, the cremated remains of Safa the Reader Man was simply thrown away.